what's difficult about medical school isn't that it's conceptually difficult. Like, there are some topics that's conceptually difficult, but the difficult part is the volume of information that you have to remember. It's a lot of it just factual recall.
I think it's pretty similar in pre-med, if there's any pre-meds watching. None of the concepts are that difficult.
So you get degrees, PE equals the MD, but it's not the MD that you want to be.
I guess there's always going to be personal things going on, like in health, in, relationships.
Yeah.
But you got to find a way to get over it, right? And get stronger from it.
Yeah. Nobody cares anyway. They care about me and they say, Harry, I don't want you to work so hard. I want to see you have good health and not be stressed and not suffer. But what if what I want is to suffer?
So I agree with you, but I also think having self-reflection and knowing that you don't know everything, right?
True.
And that people are thinking of things in different ways that you may not have thought of.
That's a very good point. To be open-minded.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's the one. That's the way.
That's the one. The take-home message is focus on your learning, focus on your knowledge, not just looking at the grades. Cool, so let's talk a bit about medical school, okay? So you're coming into your second year now, another month before second year starts. Yeah. What have you heard of how the medical school is structured?
I've heard that, something to my surprise, that there's not 4 papers a semester. It's all like one big paper with some overarching things going throughout the semester, different modules. There's not even an exam week, which is mind-boggling. There's just like progress tests, module tests. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. So the medical school is structured quite differently to normal university. So it's normal universities, 4 courses or 4 papers per semester. In medical school, it's on its own world. So it spans across the whole year, and you basically go through different human body systems. It's like a menu. Like, in second and third year in other courses, it's like second year's building on the things that are taught in first year, and then third year's building on second year, like the sort of papers. Whereas in medical school, second and third year's completely different content. There's a tiny bit of overlapping, but at the end of third year, there's a tiny bit of overlapping, but it's pretty much completely different. So in second year, you learn your anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, and things like that. And then you have your Howard and Moldy courses. So that's learning about the inequities that our indigenous population faces, and how to improve their health quality and health outcome and the access to health for these more deprived populations. And then, so that's 2. And then you've got your professional and clinical skills domain. So that's, learning how to interact with patients, learning how to be a doctor. Clinical examinations, you learn those as well. So listening to heart and lungs and those exciting things.
That's cool.
You never touched a stethoscope before?
No.
You will very soon. Yeah, so those things. And then there's also your labs. So the 4 big sorts of areas, your applied science, your Howard and Moldy, your professional and clinical skills, and then your labs. So labs include cadaver dissection labs, microbiology labs, and then there's also physiology labs. So that's how medical school is structured. The main sort of learning, I would say, if I had to put my hand on one, is the applied science. You go through musculoskeletal, digestive system, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, and you go through that. In second year, you learn all the body system below the neck. In third year, it's everything above the neck, plus your immunology, your endocrinology, and things like that.
I see.
Yeah, so that's just how the structure of second and third year.
That's useful to know, yeah. I've heard a lot of medical students say, like, C's get degrees after the first year. I don't know how true that is, but is there any, benefit to getting good grades versus just getting average grades?
Yeah, so the grades in preclinical years do not matter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can get, as long as you pass, as long as you get above a C minus, as long as you, I almost thought I forgot to record. No, but I did.
Imagine.
Yeah, leave this in there. I like it. Yeah. So grades in preclinical years do not matter. So as long as you get above a C minus, you're sweet on paper. But the reality is, when you get to your clinical years, let me rephrase this. If you're barely scraping past with a C minus and C or C plus, it just means that you don't really know much about that particular topic, and you really don't know much because sometimes the medical school scales up everyone's scores. So, for example, for my year, for musculoskeletal, our year did really badly. So I think the med school had to scale up the scores by 10% or something. So if you just barely scraped past, you're actually not doing very well. So that's not good for clinical years because that means that by the time you get to clinical years, you don't really know anything. And that's not a good look because whatever specialties that you want to go for, the interviews for that specialty starts on the day you're on the wards. So on the day you're being seen by your seniors, the doctors that you work with, they see you, they remember you. And if you don't know anything and you've got a bad attitude, that's not a good look. So C's get degrees, it's correct in preclinical years on paper, but in reality, you really want to be getting sort of like at least a B, or if you can get an A minus or A, that's even better. That just means that you really know your content really well and you really have that on paper medical knowledge quite well so that you can hopefully apply it to your clinical years.
True.
Have you heard much about like clinical years in medical school?
Yeah, like after third year, and I haven't heard too much.
So in second and third year, it's a classroom environment where you learn everything with your lecturers, with your peers, in small groups, and doing projects and doing assignments and things like that, and doing exams. You get one GP placement for an afternoon in second year, and then at the end of third year, you get one afternoon a week, go to the hospital, speak to the patient. You don't really get much clinical exposure in second and third year. And then from fourth year onwards, it's just you're in the hospital pretty much full time, like 40 to 50 hours a week.
And you're just like learning in the hospital.
Yeah, you're learning on the job pretty much.
Then is there still like module tests, or how does the testing then work if you're learning on the job?
It's quite a bizarre way of marking because basically you get signed off by your supervisor, who is supposedly a qualified senior medical officer, so a specialist in a certain field who's the boss of the team that you're attached to. You get signed off by that person. But the main thing is that that person might only have seen you 2 or 3 times during the entire run. In clinical years, the grades that you get, pass, fail, distinction, it might not be an accurate representation of your actual knowledge. The main thing to take home for medical school is the take-home message is focus on your learning, focus on your knowledge, not just looking at the grades.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And about the content, so I've heard like 4 times the level of content of pre-med, which is so scary. How much is the workload for med?
I say about 2 times. I wouldn't say 4 times.
Okay, thank God.
Yeah. I'd say second year and third year is pretty equal. Second year is probably about twice as hard as first year in terms of content. Majority of the content comes from the applied science domain, so that's all the modules and all the human body systems that you learn. Yeah, some lectures you can get up to 100 lecture slides.
Goodness.
So I think in first year you already get like 50 or 60
Yeah, I got like
slides.
70 something for one of the first bios.
Okay, yeah, you'll get your first 100 in second year.
Triple digits.
Yeah, triple digits amount of lecture slides that you have to go home and revise. But that's about that. And then third year is about the same amount of content as second year, but you do have what they call medical humanities module. So it's basically like a gen ed paper.
Okay.
Yeah, but for med school, they call it medical humanities.
Oh, fun.
They like to wrap things up in beautiful terms, you know? Yeah. So that's the workload.
Yeah.
And in terms of assessments, in second and third year, you mainly get assessed on module tests. So after you get taught each human body system, you get a test sort of every 4 or 5 weeks. And then there's also progress tests.
Yeah, something I found mind-boggling about progress tests is everyone from second year med to 6th year sits the same progress test, like the same content in that test, which is so weird because we're expected to know the same as 6 years, but they grade you relative to your cohort, right? So you're on a bell curve and you don't need to necessarily, you probably won't pass your progress tests in second year, is that right?
You will pass based on your comparison to your cohort.
But not raw pass, Because that's quite difficult to do.
Well, there's no raw passing because they judge whether you pass by comparing it to your cohort.
Oh, okay.
So progress test is basically a test that is set at graduate level. So a graduate level, a newly graduated doctor, you'd be expected to score, I'd say at least around you'd be expected to score 50 to 60% at least. The good people, they might score sort of 70, 80%. The lower people, maybe 40, sort of 45% sort of thing. Which is like really, I've never heard of such a test for other careers. Like that's really,
bizarre.
Imagine you're doing architecture and you've got an exam that's set at graduate level for you to, I don't know what architectures do, but like to create a plan for a building, and you have to write it. You have to do 3 of them every single year and draft out a plan for a building or something. Like it's a unique thing that applies to medical school. But in second year, you won't be expected much.
So what's the score that like a second year would usually get in a progress test?
If you're a postgraduate student or you've done some sort of healthcare degree, then you'd be scoring a bit higher. Usually, if you're an undergrad, in your first ever progress test, I scored 8%. 8%.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So there's 125 questions, and you really won't know much. Like, you'll see in April in your first progress test, like you'd go into it, you won't know what's going on. Like you see all these clinical scenarios. Basically, another thing to talk about medical school assessment is that most of the assessment that's done on paper, it's done by clinical scenarios. So you get a clinical scenario. For example, the STEM would be, there's an 83-year-old man coming in with shortness of breath, chest pain, and fever, and coughing out some green sputum. And that's been going on for the past 5 days, and it's getting worse. And so, do you know what's going on?
I don't.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's the top diagnosis is it's probably pneumonia. And then once you see the STEM, you'll immediately have to have formed a differential diagnosis, and then the question would be, what's the most likely antibiotic to be used?
Okay, so very like applied knowledge.
Yeah, quite applied knowledge, and it will be the answer would be there will be 5 options, and it will be a bunch of names of antibiotics that you've never heard before until at least 4th year.
It's quite a cool way to test.
Yeah, it's quite a cool way to test, but it's a good way to show your progress, which is why it's called progress test. It's a good way to show your progress in knowledge. So I remember, when I was in second year, my first progress test, I got around 8%. In my second one, I got around, I think it was 18. My third one was around 24, I think. No, 28. I think 28 in my third one. And then in third year, I went back down to 24.
Oh, no.
And then I think around 27. And then 32 at the end of the third year. And then now the last one was at the end of 4th year that I did. I got 45%.
Oh, sick, so.
So I'm good progression. It's good to see.
So the fact that as like a 5th year, you might be tested on knowledge that you learned maybe as a second year.
Yeah.
How do you retain that knowledge for like 3 years without consciously studying all of it?
Yeah, so I think that applies more to going from second year to third year. So you don't remember much things in third year, things that you learned in second year. So the first module that you learn in second year medical school is musculoskeletal. So that's just everything, muscles and bones and nerves and things like that. You learn it in March and April. And then you don't ever touch that topic again until 4th year.
Oh, wow.
Your orthopedics run in 4th year. So I had my musculoskeletal system test in April 2021. And I didn't remember anything. I don't remember anything by June. And then I've never touched anything about musculoskeletal until September last year when I had my orthopedics specialty rotation. And so I was forced to relearn everything in musculoskeletal within like a few weeks. So to answer your question, I think it really applies to second and third year because you don't have a chance to revise the content. But then once you get to 4th year, when you actually have to apply the knowledge and you don't have that knowledge, you're going to have to go back and revisit it anyway.
Yeah, so be able to like relearn that kind of knowledge in a short amount of time.
That's the reason why I say it's important for you to learn and hone in content in the preclinical year as well, because that can give you a huge advantage.
So C's get degrees, but doesn't make you a good doctor, I guess.
Yeah, C's get degrees, P equals the MD, but it's not the MD that you want to be.
There you go.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you sort of wish you knew going into second year med?
I think I wish I would have studied a bit less. I got an A overall in second year, and that was good. That helped me during my medical runs in fourth year and fifth year. Well, hopefully fifth year, but in fourth year last year. But it really, like, the amount of effort required to get an A and A plus, it's quite a lot.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, I could have studied a bit less now. I don't regret it because I had some personal issues going on the side at the time, and studying was a way for me to distract myself. But if there was something that I knew, that would be try to get good grades, but not to the point where you're sacrificing your life for it. Yeah. That would be the main thing that that I wish I knew.
Cool. Yeah. Fair enough. And just in terms of studying, like, what do you do when you come across a concept that you don't understand? What's your layers of things that you do to understand difficult concepts?
I don't know if you ever had that moment where you're listening to a lecture recording or reading something on a lecture slide and you don't understand something. Then you really try to look things up and find things and ask people and try to understand that concept for like half an hour.
Yeah.
And then you're like, screw it. And then you keep on listening to the lecture, and then 5 minutes later, you realize that if you had listened to the lecture 5 minutes later, you would have understood the whole thing.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So the first thing that I would do if there's a concept that I couldn't understand is think about it for a brief second, then move on and finish the whole topic, then come back to it. Because a lot of the times, if you can just move on from it, the remaining knowledge that you receive about the topic can sometimes fill the gap, and it just clicks. If that even doesn't work, if after that, if you finish the lecture and you still don't understand it, usually the first thing I do is look it up online, maybe watch a video about it. Because sometimes when someone else explains it to you in a different sort of angle or perspective, it helps you get that click. Yeah. And then if that doesn't work, then I'll start talking to my peers and my friends. Yeah, that's something that I find quite helpful. So in summary, I'll move on from that detail, finish the whole topic, come back to it. If I still struggle, then I'll do different things like look it up online, watch a video about it, and then if not, then I'll start asking my peers.
Yeah, that sounds like a good approach.
Usually that solves 98% of the concepts, and if by that time you still don't understand, then most of the people around you won't understand, and that's probably something that's really difficult. And I always say this, it's really rare for you to come across those so difficult concepts, just because medical school is like, what's difficult about medical school isn't that it's conceptually difficult. Like, there are some topics that's conceptually difficult, but the difficult part is the volume of information that you have to remember. It's a lot of it just factual recall, and even if it's a concept, it's such an easy concept in a way that you can just remember the concept. It's not like maths or physics or engineering where you've learned a concept, you've learned the formula, and there's a question coming by and you still can't apply it. It's not like that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty similar in pre-med, if there's any pre-meds watching. None of the concepts are that difficult, like to the point where you just can't wrap your head around it. Like, some are hard, and my approach was sort of like, I would ask ChatGPT first, and then from there, if I don't get anything, I'd ask Google. From there, Piazza, which is available for us first years in pre-med. And then, like, my last layer was asking a friend. That was the way that I solved like 98% of my problems. So what was the biggest challenge that you faced in medical school, and how did you overcome it? Maybe specifically in second year.
Yeah, so for me in let's just start off by saying that different people find different things challenging. So some people, they find the money side of things challenging because maybe they came from a small town and they have to flat in Auckland and they need to work a job, and flatting and groceries in Auckland's expensive, so money is a problem. Some people find maybe studying is a problem because they came from a background, maybe they did not do science in high school, or they don't have a scientific background, so they have to catch up. That could be difficult. For me personally, I just had some health problems during second and third year, and that was quite difficult because without health, you have nothing, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. And you just have to find a way to sort of work around it.
I guess there's always going to be personal things going on, like in health, in, I don't know, relationships.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got to find a way to get over it, right? And get stronger from it.
Yeah. Nobody cares anyway. Like you, like, I always think like this: the best way to overcome something is just solve the problem. Like, it's not talking to people or talking to your mom or talking to a dog. You know, like, it doesn't really help. The only thing that helps is look at it yourself and be self-accountable and be like, I just have to get over this and solve the problem, and then I'll be good. Yeah, that's
something that I found though, like in situations where I thought I found the best way to solve a problem. This is a very general talk, but in situations where I thought I found the best way to solve a problem, then I talked to my mum about it, talked to someone else about it, and there's better ways to solve that problem. There's things I haven't thought of. But I also guess just having self-reflection and knowing that you don't know everything, right? And that people are thinking of things in different ways that you may not have thought of. And that's something that I benefited from being in, like, staying at home rather than halls. I had people around me who could support me when I was going through, like, personal issues in my pre-med year. Yeah. And just being self-accountable is definitely huge, but talking to other people as well, I think.
Don't you think, like, no one genuinely cares though?
I think
like,
that,
for example, I can say that my parents cared, but they didn't care. They didn't care about it as much as I do. Like, I'm the only person who cares about my problems enough to solve it so that I can reach my goals, right? Don't you think that?
I think that that's one way to think of it.
Yeah.
But I think that people do care, maybe not to the extent that you care, because you're most invested in your own life.
Exactly.
Right? But I think that having people around you who definitely do care, like you said, your parents do care.
Yeah.
And then having their input is really important. And just getting things from different perspectives.
Sure.
Because my mind only works the way that my mind works.
Isn't that the whole point though? Because, like, your parents, this is a very general talk, but like, don't you think that your parents cares about you the way that they want you to be?
Okay.
Do you understand?
Well, I think
don't you think like that way? So say, like, I've got a health problem and I'm still working really hard and I still want to do this and do that and work really hard and achieve everything, and my parents would come to me and they care about me and they say, Harry, I don't want you to work so hard. I want just to see you have good health and not be stressed and not suffer. But what if what I want is to suffer?
Yeah,
right.
That's a good point.
So it's a different, like, I care about myself, but I want to suffer to get to my goals. Whereas they care about me, but they care about me in a way that they want me to have good health. So they care about me, but in the ideal way that they want to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
I guess. Right? Yeah, I guess you are the one making the final decision, and you know yourself best. But hearing the different perspective of your parents, like you said in your second year, that you wish you studied a bit less, you could have had a bit of a social life. So I guess it's. And in my case, in my pre-med year, and I can speak from experience, my family was telling me, like, Khusrav, in my first few weeks, like, you need to relax, you need to stop studying this much. Because they didn't think I was going to be this into it, like 13 to 14 hours a day. Yeah. And no, I didn't let that get to me. But hearing that was also important. Because let's say I ramped it up to 16, 17 hours a day. Yeah. I would have burned out. And it would have gotten to a point where I probably wouldn't have gotten into med. So I guess just knowing what you don't know. And allowing other voices to seep in to get that different perspective. So I agree with you, but I also think you gotta have those other voices. They have to be there. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just gonna keep going on your path only. You're not gonna take any left or right turns.
True. Yeah. That's a very good point. To be open-minded.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's the one. That's the word.
That's the one. Yeah. So let's talk a bit about medical specialties. All right. Do you have any idea what special? Like, I know that it's quite early. You haven't even started your first class in medical school yet, but do you have any idea what specialties you want to go into?
Well, my mum works a bit in ophthalmology. She just does some admin work. So I know quite a few ophthalmologists, so eye surgeons. Sure. So that does interest me, but I've heard the lifestyle is crazy. Orthopedics also interests me. Okay. The ability to give someone, like, the ability to walk after not being able to. And working with injuries that I've gone through myself. My brother's had an ACL surgery, and an orthopedic surgeon helped him. Sure. So I think orthopedics or ophthalmology is what I'm leaning towards.
So you're definitely a surgeon?
I think I'm going to lean towards surgery, but who knows what will happen.
Yeah, it's using these, you definitely make more money using these than these.
It's a steady...
Yeah. So do you know much about, like, postgraduate and how you get into specialty or things like that?
Yeah, so I know that there's a point system for each specialty,
Yep.
and that it can be quite grueling. Like on the ophthalmology one, being an Olympic athlete gives you like 4 points or something like that, which
really?
is, yeah, it's something like
I
that,
didn't
which
know
is crazy. And that research helps you in that if you're the first author on a publication, that can give you points. But I also know it's really competitive. Like orthopedics, 40% of people who applied got in. Some years it's way less, so more competitive than I thought.
40%?
Yeah, like 30 to 40% on some of the years, and in some years it's less.
I think it's more like 13 to
Real.
14%. I don't know about the exact numbers. If there's any senior medical students or doctors watching, you know anything or you want to correct anything that we've said in this podcast, please feel free to comment. So let's just, before we go into how specialty works, let's just go through very quickly, very briefly, after you graduate medical school. So 6 years of medical school, then you graduate, and you have to do 2 years as a house officer or as an intern. Do you know what's a house officer?
Yeah, so they do different ward rounds.
Do you know why house officers are called house officers?
No, actually, never thought of that.
No. It's because back in 1820, they used to live in a house in the hospital.
Oh.
That's why they're called house officers, because they used to live on site. Because back in the days, it's like, there's no medical schools back in 1820, right? Well, there was, but it's not structured like nowadays. It's not a standard-based course. It's basically a very traditional apprenticeship model where an aspiring doctor just finds a tutor, and then they just kind of learn on the job. So they live on site. And the short answer is house officers, interns used to live on site. That's why in the UK and in New Zealand and Australia, I think Australia is trying to change it now. They're trying to move more towards the American system, the American terms. But that's why in these countries, interns are called house officers. But anyway, a house officer is basically an intern doctor in the first year or two of their postgraduate training. So you just rotate through the big specialties in medicine and surgery. And then in your first year postgraduate, you have to do, I think, 2 surgical runs and 2 medical runs. And in your second year as a house officer, you can kind of choose more. So you get to pick, ICU and ED and those more niche things. Again, if there's anything that I said wrong, please correct me in the comments below. I'm not going to take any offense. And then after your house officer years, you get your general medical license. That's when you get registered. And then you become what we call a registrar. Or if you're from North America, a resident. But that's a broad term. Have you heard of the term registrar?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So in real registrar years, there's also non-training registrar and training registrar.
Okay.
Or you might be hearing lay terms, junior registrar and senior registrar. Now, training just means that whether or not you're in a specialty training program. So say you want to go for orthopedics. That is usually quite competitive. So most of the surgical specialties are quite competitive. Generally, the more lucrative specialties are more competitive. So, which makes sense, right? Because money is important. So after your 2 house officer years, generally speaking, you have to do a few years as a non-training registrar, which means that you're on the job, you're being an orthopedic registrar, but you're not in the training program yet. The time is not accredited. The time that you're spending that time doing is basically gaining work experience and potentially having some research experience as well. And that's basically, and getting some connections as well. And that's basically to buff up your CV so that when you apply, what matters is your research experience, your work experience, so what sorts of rotations you've done, what sorts of clinical exposure do you have. And then it's also about the people that you know as well, who's supporting you in your application when they select people. And then there's also your interview as well. So there's lots of things that comes together about whether you get into specialty or not. But generally, especially for surgical training programs, from the people that I've seen, you generally have to do at least 2 years as a non-training surgical registrar. So if it's orthopedics, you have to do at least I've never heard of anyone who got in straight after house officer, because it's quite competitive and lots of people, they've got lots of good CVs, so you have to reach a level before people know you and you've got good experience before you can be good enough to apply. Usually 2 years, maybe even more, up to 4 or 5 years. And then you go through your senior registrar years, which is training, which is what we call a training registrar. And that's when you're in the actual training program for, I think it's 6 or 7 years as a surgical, if you do surgery. If it's medicine, it's 5 or 6 years. Then at the end of the training, you do a fellowship. So a fellowship is basically a subspecialty in the specialty that you want to go for. So if you're an orthopedic trainee and you want to specialize in the shoulder, if you really enjoy shoulder surgery, you might go to a hospital or site that's really good at doing shoulder surgeries, and you spend a whole year learning about shoulder. That's when you're called a fellow, and that's your fellowship. So after that, then you become a consultant. So that's already, if you think about it, 2 years as a house officer. If you're doing surgery, at least 2 years as a non-training registrar, then another 6 years as a training registrar. That's already 10 years.
Wow.
So at least 10 years if you're quick, if you want to be a surgeon. If you're doing medicine, a bit quicker. Some people can get in right after house officer. And the training programs are slightly shorter, so maybe 7 years postgraduate if you want to go for a medical specialty.
Wow, so we both have a long road ahead.
Yeah, it depends on what specialty you want to go for and what specialty I want to go for.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There's some specialties that you can apply right after being a house officer. So I think if you want to go for anesthesia, you can apply straight as a PGY3. So PGY3 just means postgraduate year 3. And there are people who get in postgraduate year 3, and I've heard about it. Yeah. So it really depends on the specialties. But in general, to summarize, surgical specialties and the more lucrative medical specialties is usually more competitive. More people applies for them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.